Well, everybody, I really appreciate you all being here. Really excited to kind of kick off this series of speakers about the CSC and the charisms. And we're very blessed to have Father Drew Garrett with us today. Before he joined the CSC, he was a student here at Notre Dame, lived in Keogh Hall, and one of his rectors was Father Tom Doyle, and also Father Pete Jarrett. After he graduated with a degree in government and international relations, he joined the Moreau Seminary as a candidate. And while he was in the seminary with Father Kevin Grove, who's also CSC, he edited the book, The Cross, Our Only Hope, which is a book of meditations on the CSC. His first assignment was associate pastor at St. John Vianney Parish in Goodyear, Arizona. And then just over a year ago, he came back to campus. He lives at Moreau Seminary, and he is the associate director of the Office of Vocations for the Holy Cross. So he is well-versed in the Holy Cross, and excited to have him here today. And please give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. So I would have felt maybe a little more comfortable if I brought my bow tie this morning. So unfortunately, I didn't get the memo. And I actually went through the episode with Elizabeth. It's nice to see a lot of faces out here right now. Certainly the pressure increases with some of my Holy Cross brothers being here, since they can evaluate the presentation along the way, give me a grade when I'm done. Thumb up or thumb down would be nice along the way. So, but I'm really thrilled and humbled to be here with you this morning to talk about one of my favorite topics, of course, which is the Congregation of Holy Cross. Of course, I love Holy Cross. I joined Holy Cross because of what it meant to me in my education and my growth as a student here at the University of Notre Dame. And I also did a study abroad while I was here in Santiago, Chile, and lived at an orphanage down in Chile that was run by the Congregation of Holy Cross. And seeing the way that our priests and our brothers, it was a brother actually who was the director of the orphanage, the way that they really committed themselves to work for those young people really moved me, and that's part of the story, a large part of the story, why I became a Holy Cross priest. So I love talking about Holy Cross. I love bragging about my family, so it's great to be here to talk to you about it today. So in particular, this is of course kicking off the series that you'll have for the rest of the year. I was asked to speak about the charism of Holy Cross, and so charism is a pretty big word, one we might not all have the same definition for, so I want to start a little bit talking about what the word charism means and what we're here to talk about today. Hopefully you know that charism for us as Christians and Catholics is always first and foremost a gift from the Holy Spirit. I'm going to talk about a lot of other things than the Holy Spirit, but it's really important we start there, that what we're talking about today when we talk about the charism of Holy Cross, its identity, we believe that's a gift from the Spirit, something that God gave to the church and to the world when he asked Blessed Basil Moreau to found the community. Of course, you're part of that gift by serving with us here at the University of Notre Dame. But it's important for us to keep that in mind, that ultimately what we're doing, who we are as Holy Cross, and the work you share in with us is a gift from the Spirit. It's meant to be a gift from the Spirit to the church and to the world, because that's why God gives gifts from the Spirit. They're not for our own good, we know. Whenever we get gifts as individuals, they're for the service of others. When God gives gifts to particular communities, which we believe he does as well too, those gifts are not just meant for that particular community, they're meant to serve the wider church and world. So all we're talking about today when we talk about the charism of Holy Cross, I think it's important to keep in that context. It's a gift from the Holy Spirit, and it's a gift meant to serve the church and the world. When we talk about charism of a community, though, I think it's a little easier for us to think of particular charisms, that someone might have a particular charism as a good preacher, someone have a particular charism as a great counselor, someone might have a particular charism as really working one-on-one with people and being able to help them grow in their faith. Charism, when we talk about in the context of community, is probably a little bit harder for us to define, so I have a cute little way that I like to do it, and we're going to use this schema, because I like schemas, I like to think through things kind of orderly and rationally, about how we're going to address what is the charism of Holy Cross. Some people like to say the charism of a community is its personality, its mission, its work. Well, it involves all those things, but I think it's much greater. When I want to talk about charism today, I want to talk about it in three ways. That the charism of a religious community is who they are, what they do, and how they do it. Who they are, what they do, and how they do that. All those things come together to define Holy Cross. And essentially you could say it's really our identity. So that's how we're going to break this down and look a little bit about understanding this reality that is Holy Cross. Who is Holy Cross? What do they do? And how do they do it? That's, of course, what will distinguish Holy Cross from other religious communities like the Jesuits, the Benedictines, the Dominicans, because we all take the same religious vows. All of us who are religious in the church, brothers, priests, and sisters, take the same vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. I work in vocation, so a big part of my work is helping young men discern, well, what's different between the Jesuits, the Dominicans, the Benedictines, and Holy Cross? Why would God be calling me to Holy Cross and not to one of those communities? So a lot of the work that I do on a daily basis in articulating who we are as Holy Cross, what we do and how we do it, helps young men be able to discern where they're called to work. And so these categories help us again understand what's the unique gift that God gave to the church and to the world when he gave us Holy Cross. How do we share in that gift, and how can we spread that gift to others? So that's how we're going to break it down. As I mentioned, I'm going to draw on my experience here from the University of Notre Dame as a student. I also spent time in our missions in Chile, and then as was mentioned in the introduction, I also started my life out as a baby priest, as we like to say on Holy Cross, at St. John Vianney Parish. That's where I cut my teeth in priestly ministry. And as you'll see later, those three experiences are really important. They're foundational for Holy Cross, those three particular areas. My hope is that by the end of this half hour, 40 minutes, you have a good introduction to Holy Cross, where you'll understand at a deeper level why Notre Dame is the way that it is. Because, of course, Notre Dame is Notre Dame because it was founded by Holy Cross. I strongly believe that the Jesuits could have never founded Notre Dame. The Dominicans could have never founded Notre Dame. In fact, they didn't, because they couldn't, because their charism was different. It's the Holy Cross charism that's at the root and the lifeblood of the University of Notre Dame. But note what I said there. I said the Holy Cross charism. It's not just Holy Cross. It's not just us priests and religious and sisters who are at the roots and the lifeblood of the university. It's the Holy Cross charism, which is something that you, as lay collaborators with us, share in. It's the Holy Cross charism, again, that's at the root and the lifeblood of this university. Notre Dame is what it is today because it has, at its foundation, and has had pumping through its life from its beginning, the Holy Cross charism. So again, I hope at a deeper level, you understand why Notre Dame is, at least in some ways, the way it is because of the way Holy Cross is and how God made Holy Cross to be. So in some sense, there's not going to be a lot that's overly revelatory about what I'm going to share this evening as I go, or evening, wow, I've not been up that long. Or maybe it feels like I have. So what we'll share this morning, it's not going to be overly revelatory. As we go along and think, well, I knew that, I realized that. Hopefully what we'll be doing is expanding the perspective and the background you have, again, for why this place is the way that it is. At least from my experience here as a student, I think sometimes those of us who are here at Notre Dame could really articulate well Notre Dame, its mission, its identity, its purpose. But then if we started to talk about Holy Cross, a lot of us would clam up and not be able to say too much. And in defense of all of us on that, I think Holy Cross, I think we've struggled at times to articulate who we are, what we do, and how we do it. Although that, I'm going to argue, is actually part of our charism as well, too. That struggle should be actually pretty easy to understand when we understand who we are and who God made us to be. But this will, I think, hopefully help you make some connections between Notre Dame and Holy Cross that will help bring this alive so you can be better collaborators with us in mission. As I always said, though, when I gave RCA talks, or any talk really, even here at Fides, make sure you put your seats, tray tables, in their full upright and locked position. Because when I present, I tend to go at a pretty rapid pace because I have a lot of information we want to go through. So we're going to go pretty quickly, but along the way, there is time for questions at the end. But if there is something along the way you want to stop me for and ask me to go a little bit deeper, please feel free to raise your hand and ask a question. Because I know the folks at home might have questions as well, too. I was supposed to give them a shout out as well. So. And that actually probably plays into our charism, too. All these things we're going to understand deeper. So, again, we wanted to start off with charism by saying who we are is the first main question that we want to answer when we're looking at the charism of Holy Cross. And I think the first main thing to answer, to say there about who Holy Cross is that we're apostolic religious. Don't have a lot of time this morning to get a full explanation as what it means to be a religious, but of course as religious we take the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. We take those because we want to live closer to the way that Jesus lived his life. We believe that Jesus was poor, he was chaste, and he was obedient to his Father's will. And so we're trying to, in a particular way, bring Jesus' presence alive in our world today. We're also trying to help all of us remember that this world is not our ultimate home by giving up some things that we really value in this world that are goods. Things like marriage, things like some of our own ability to make decisions. We try to point to ourselves and to others that there is something greater than this world. There's something greater that we're living for, which is ultimately our home in heaven. And these vows, we believe as religious, and I've experienced it quite powerfully, they free us to love other people more broadly and more deeply. One of the most amazing experiences about being a religious is how, again, those vows free us. When we say forever in the church, for poverty, chastity, and obedience. I think the world often looks at us as selling ourselves to slavery. But I've never been freer. I've never been more able to love others, more empowered to love others since I became a Holy Cross religious, because those vows free me of things that can help me really attach myself to others in a way to love them the way that Christ loved them. And so that's true of all religious, of course, along with the Benedictines, the Dominicans, the Jesuits. We share that in common with them. What starts to distinguish us a little bit as Holy Cross, though, among other religious, is that we're apostolic. I'm going to be using some terms that probably some people aren't very familiar with, some terms that other people aren't as familiar with, so if I'm going again too quick, please let me know. But apostolic, that word comes from the word apostle, which you might recognize more. Jesus had the 12 apostles, and the word apostle comes from the word of the one who is sent, or the one who was sent. And so apostles are people who were sent out in mission to do something. And so apostolic, when it's added the word religious, means that we're religious who are really focused on mission, that we're focused on going out in the world and fulfilling the mission of Christ. That's as opposed to what are contemplative religious. Maybe you've heard the word contemplative before, but contemplative religious are ones who make their main work, their main mission, basically prayer on behalf of the church and the world. So they don't really go out into the world as much as they retreat from the world to live a life of prayer, often a life of manual labor, and silence as well too, and offer that up as an offering for the church and for the world. So there's really a spectrum there between a contemplative who focuses a lot on community and prayer, and an apostolic religious who's going to be more focused on the mission out in the world. So there's a spectrum between the two. So the question with Holy Cross is, where does Holy Cross fall on that spectrum? Because that's part of what will start to distinguish us. It's part of what makes us who we are. Well, on the spectrum of contemplative to apostolic, Holy Cross is pretty far moved to the apostolic side of the spectrum. We're very focused on mission. And I think this is seen most powerfully in our fundamental documents. I meant to bring a copy of it. It's like Art du Lac, but the Constitutions of the Congregation of Holy Cross. It's our way of life. It's the rules that guide and define our life. And the order of them is very purposeful, and it's different than other communities. The first chapter talks about God's call. Of course, as religious, really as any Christian, our lives begin with God calling us, inviting us to something. But the second chapter is on mission. So we believe that God calls us to a mission. From there, the third and the fourth chapters are about prayer and brotherhood, or community. But that order is very purposeful. We believe in Holy Cross we're called to a mission, and because we have this mission, we then are called to prayer, and from prayer we're built up into a community. Other communities, their constitutions are written in a reverse order. God calls them to community, which leads them to prayer, and they're sent out in mission. And that fundamental ordering does make a very big difference in the way the religious community lives out its work and its mission. The example or contrast I always like to give is of the missionary Sisters of Charity, who I have a very deep love and affection for. We just celebrated the feast day of Blessed Teresa of Calcutta. Love their charism, love their work, but they're very different from Holy Cross in this respect. For them, they have a very set community life that they live. There are certain rhythms that they have to their day that are really non-negotiable for them, including a holy hour at a set time. So if they're doing a particular ministry, say AIDS ministry, and the patients need to receive their medication at that hour, well, someone else is going to have to help with that. They'll have to have volunteers that will help cover that hour because their community, in a sense, is sacrosanct. It comes first for them. It's not that the community doesn't bend to the mission, their mission will bend to the community. So they're going to shape their missions where they serve to make sure that they can live their community life, because community for them comes first. Holy Cross, it's the exact opposite. Our community life and our prayer will bend to the needs of the mission. And this is the fundamental reason, one of the fundamental reasons why we have rectors living in dorms, staying up to 2 a.m. with students. If community life really came first for us in Holy Cross, if that was our sacrosanct identity as religious, we would never do that. Because having rectors, having priests and brothers live in dorms actually makes community life harder to live because of the hours that they keep to be there with the students. So community that placed community more strongly than mission would never put priests in dorms, would never put brothers in dorms, because it would make their communal life, which was so important, those times of prayer and meals together, too difficult to live. But for Holy Cross, the question for us, and this was true at the parish as well too, is how best can we serve in the mission? Not to the point, we're not so apostolic that community is not important for us. But at the parish, the time we had evening prayer and the time we ate dinner was not the most convenient time for us as priests. I mean, if we were left to ourselves, we would have picked a different hour. We picked that hour because of the way things are in Arizona and the crazy reality that is Phoenix. We had to start programs at the parish at 7 p.m. You couldn't go any earlier, and you really couldn't go any later. And so that time for ministry in the evening dictated the time that we had dinner and we had prayer. Very Holy Cross. Again, the community and our prayer, which are important, are going to bend to the mission. We didn't give them up, but they bent to the mission, rather than having the mission bend itself to our community life and our prayer. Fundamental about Holy Cross, it's true across all our apostolates, that you'll see our priests and our religious, and because of that, the lay people who work with us as well too, I'm sure you all do this as well too, we bend our lives for the sake of the mission. That's the beautiful thing about Holy Cross, but that's not true of all religious communities. That's one thing that starts to make us different. Does that make sense? It's a pretty fundamental thing about us. I also will add, as a little asterisk there, one other thing as I was talking about is, I think because Holy Cross is so mission-focused, we're so focused on the apostolate, and that really comes for us first, it's why there's another very beautiful thing about Holy Cross, and we see this in spades here at the University of Notre Dame, is that we have been able to create apostolates, which are works, apostolic works, schools, oratories, that have become bigger than Holy Cross. So the University of Notre Dame is better known in the world in the church than the Congregation of Holy Cross. The Oratory of St. Joseph is better known up in Canada than the Congregation of Holy Cross. Not all religious communities have created works that end up being bigger than who they are. When you think of the Jesuits for a moment, I love the Jesuits. My uncle is their Procurator General, so everything I say about the Jesuits is said in love. Please know that. But if you think about the Jesuits have remained bigger than their institutions. The Jesuits are much better known in the United States than their particular colleges or universities. There's nothing wrong with that, but it reveals a difference in charism, because for us in Holy Cross, the mission always comes first. It's always about the mission. So why have we not often talked about our community? Why have we often not talked about our prayer as much as we probably should have at times? Well, again, it was coming from something good in us, the fact that the mission comes first. And we want to talk about the mission. It's about the mission. It's about serving first. We come second in that equation, both in the way we live our lives, but also in the way we often articulate about it. So this reality that we've struggled sometimes here at Notre Dame and other places to articulate who we are as Holy Cross actually points to one of the gifts about Holy Cross. We put the mission first. Even after the community went through the Land O'Lakes Accord and Notre Dame became its own entity apart from the congregation, over the years, the community of Holy Cross kept putting its excess salary back into the university. Even though the university was much more wealthy than the community, that was another sign again of Holy Cross saying we're going to put the mission of our university first, above our community and above even our own lives, because again, for us, mission comes first. It's fundamental to who we are as Holy Cross. If you want to understand a lot of our idiosyncrasies, that's one of the key things to remember about us. We're apostolic religious. The apostolate, the mission comes first. Community and prayer are very important for us, but they feed the mission. And they're at the service of the mission. Other communities, again, the mission's at the service in some sense of the community, which is beautiful as well too. Some of those communities are much larger than us, but this is how God made us to be. Oh, so my joking way of talking about this, so you can have, I usually, of course with young men, it's good to have funny ways to talk about things. So I like to say on this one, 2 jobs is too few. That's my joking way about saying that about Holy Cross. 2 jobs is too few. You know it's about Holy Cross priests on campus, they're brothers as well. They usually have like 3 or 4 jobs at once, because 1 job is not enough to keep us busy. We have to have multiple. Because again, the apostolate comes first. So 2 jobs is hard, too few, I guess, but it sounds snappier if it is. English teachers out there could not correct my grammar. The second, I think, very important thing to talk about when we're saying who Holy Cross is that we're a family. Our founder wanted us to be a family, priests, brothers, and sisters, modeled after the Holy Family of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, and that's who he dedicated us to. And he said, and this is going to be really important, especially for your work in the Division of Student Affairs, was that community, family, was a part of our mission as well, too. We're going to talk a little bit about this more later. But I think our current constitutions say it so well. It's essential to our mission that we strive to abide so attentively together that people will observe, see how they love one another. We will then become a sign in an alienated world, men who have, for love of their Lord, become closest neighbors, trustworthy friends, brothers. So our family, our community, was to be part of what we do. We're going to talk about when we get to the what we do section. It was also meant to be part of our mission. It was a fundamental identity for who we are to be. Again, priests, brothers, and sisters. Practically speaking, what that means is, I think you've experienced this about Holy Cross, is that Holy Cross, compared to other religious communities, has a much more familial feel to it. Our relationships with each other are much more informal and much more casual. When Holy Cross priests get together and we hang out, we don't call each other Father. I remember the first time I called Father Mark Porman, who I always, as a student, called Father Porman. I mean, we didn't even call him Father Mark. I remember the first time that I called him Mark. I swear I was going to get served from residence life and have to go in for a little disciplinary hearing. But amongst ourselves, we don't call each other father and brother. There's an informality. There's a familial feel to our relationships in our community life with each other. It's one of the main reasons I felt called to join Holy Cross, because I had grown up wanting to be married, have a family. I was hoping for 8 to 12 kids. I wanted a big family. And so in giving up that, I was hoping for a religious community that would give me something that would be akin to family. And that's what I saw in Holy Cross, was that the way the community related to each other wasn't formal. It wasn't institutional. There was a familial feel to it. And that was one of the great things that attracted me to Holy Cross. And one of the great things about Holy Cross is that we believe that family extends to the people with whom we serve and for whom we serve. I believed this before I joined the community, so it's not me trying to pump Holy Cross. The reason there is something called the Notre Dame family that is real and tangible, apart from this age when we use the word family all the time anyway, there's something real and tangible about the Notre Dame family. It exists because Holy Cross extended its family to the university. Same thing's true at St. John Vianney Parish. They call themselves a family there as well, too. Why is it really true, I think, to say about St. John Vianney Parish? It's a family. It's not just a community. It's not just a parish. It has a familial feel. People's relationships with each other speak more of family than they do of community. Why is that? Well, Holy Cross at that parish extended its community to the parish, both by witnessing to it in the way that the priests and the brothers and the seminarians have related, but also in the way that they were invited in to be a part of that community in prayer and worship and mission and living together. It's the fact that priests and brothers have been living in dorms since basically the beginning. It's the fact that this extension of the communities happened from the very beginning of our family to the university that we can speak of the Notre Dame family. And I think that's an important thing for us to remember. One of the funny ways, I was told to tell at least one funny story. One of the funny ways this played out at St. John Vianney, and I think one of the things that the parishioners appreciated there so much was that they could see multiple priests and seminarians living together and how they interacted, and it meant a lot to them. I mean, one of the stories I hear the people at the parish tell the most about ministry there, and I want to tell them, I hope I left you more than this, was that the pastor and I got into what I called a little announcement war over a series of weekends. Because the pastor there, Father John Herman, who some of you might remember because he goes back, was a rector here at O'Neill Hall. A very holy man, but certainly very reserved as well, too. Not the most socially outgoing, extroverted man you'll ever meet. I took as his precocious associate upon me to usually make a few jokes about him during the announcements, because our announcements went on for, just like Keogh Hall announcements, they went on for like 10 minutes. They were almost unbearable. So to get through them, for me, I had to add a little bit of humor as well, too. So he had caught on to this. So one week, we were getting ready for our school's gala, so big fundraiser. And we had been making announcements for a long while, and he decided to spice it up, I found out. Because I'm outside of church, and people start greeting me, as we always did after Mass. The Holy Cross priests are always out after churches greeting people, again, that familial feel. And people are coming up to me and asking me, well, what's it like to put on a gorilla suit? I'm like, gorilla suit? Like, what are you talking about? This makes no sense. But they're, shaking hands. They all want to go out to, get their donuts or something. Well, I finally stopped someone and asked, why are you asking me if I like wearing a gorilla suit? And they said, well, Father John said you're practicing for the gala. Well, it turns out he made an announcement that for the gala, there was going to be a special show, and I was going to put on the Phoenix Suns gorilla suit because it was at the arena. I was going to do dunking off of trampolines and all this stuff. Funny, I admit. So he then, as he came out, I said to him, did you just start an announcement war with me? And he looked at me kind of sheepishly and said, don't start something you can't finish because you know how this is going to end. So the following week was my turn to get the English masses. So I stood up at the announcements and I said, I heard last week that there was something really hurtful that happened during Mass, that Father John shared with you a secret that he wasn't supposed to tell anyone else. And I really feel that my trust has been betrayed, my confidence has been broken. And I know the Christian thing to do is forgive him, but I'm just not at that place right now. So I'm going to go for revenge. So I said, I want to share with you a secret that I know about Father John. I said, well, I, yes, have been practicing with the Phoenix Suns Gorilla to do some dunks. Father John has also been practicing for a special show with the Phoenix Suns. Except he's been working with their dancers. And I said, if you want to see your pastor one last time before he leaves the diocese, you're going to want to come see this show. Because once the YouTube video gets out, he's no longer going to be our pastor. Priests don't look good in tutus. But that's a story, and it went on from there. I will only give you the short version. But parishioners keep telling that story, I think in part because what they were able to see was two priests who clearly had a great love and affection for each other, shared the bond, enjoyed working together, were different, had different personalities, different temperaments, different preaching styles, different ways of doing ministry, but we were united together. And people really appreciated that and wanted to be drawn into that. And I think we experienced that as well here. I did too at the University of Notre Dame. The way that the priests and the brothers relate to each other inspires us to want to be a part of that and to build relationships with them and build similar relationships among the students that we work with. So again, family is so important for Holy Cross. Other religious communities are great, but they don't have quite the same familial feel that Holy Cross has. It's one of those things that distinguishes us a little bit. So those are the two big things I want to, and my funny way of putting that one, although I won't write that one on the board, is they're the kind of priests you want to take out for a beer. That's the way we always talked about it as students when I was here. And of course, in parentheses, since it's student affairs, provided that you are 21. End of parentheses. But they are the kind of students, kind of priests that you'd want to take out for a beer. And I always felt that about the priests I knew here on campus. They were always approachable and someone who I thought would be a real brother or a real father to me if that's what I needed at that time. And that's, I think, one of the great things that stands out about Holy Cross. It really marks who we are. And again, marks who Notre Dame is. The Notre Dame family, in an age where we drop the word family all the time, it almost has become meaningless. I think there's something really real and meaningful about the Notre Dame family. I think there's something really real and meaningful because of the charism of Holy Cross that's at the root of the university. Of course, we don't just sit around being people, we also have to go do things. So the next big thing that distinguishes us in charism is what we do. So what does Holy Cross do? And our main tagline here, and this is something I know you've spoken about, I believe, before, is that we're educators in the faith. What we do is we provide education in the faith to the world and to the church. This goes back to our founder. We were founded by Blessed Basil Moreau. And he has this great quote. I think you've probably heard it before, but I love it. He says, quote, "We shall always place education side by side with instruction. The mind will not be cultivated at the expense of the heart. While we prepare useful citizens for society, we shall likewise do our utmost to prepare citizens for heaven." End quote. As Steve Warner and I were walking in here, he put it very beautifully as well too, but I told him, I'm not stealing your line, I had this in my presentation already. But while we're trying to prepare good scientists, good psychologists, good counselors, good engineers here at the University of Notre Dame, our ultimate mission is to prepare saints. Because what the world needs today, more than it needs engineers and scientists and doctors, is that it needs saints. It needs people of holiness. It needs people of heroic virtue who are willing to lay down their lives in service of their brothers and sisters. And that mission, we believe, as Holy Cross, goes hand in hand. We want to be creating saints who are engineers. We want to be creating saints who are doctors. We want to be creating saints who are counselors, who are psychologists. Because we know in an increasingly complex world, and Basil Moreau knew this from the beginning, in an increasingly complex world, the saints who are going to help change the world are going to need a certain level of education, expertise, and training to be able to be forces for good in the world.
Could you clarify what you mean by saints? Because a lot of different people would have different understandings. Big S, small s. It's like St. Paul's notion of saints. When you throw that word around, what do you mean?
Okay. Well, it'd be great if, like, the University of Notre Dame in 100 years had, like, 15 canonized saints. That would be spectacular. But not speaking so much of canonized, officially recognized by the church, but again, more in the small s of men and, well, I would say men and women of holiness, men and women of heroic virtue, men and women who are, to steal the Jesuit term, people for others, right? People who are living their lives for others and for God, not for themselves. And that's how I would mean that term, kind of in that broad sense. Because we're all called, we believe, right, to be saints. And so, but good clarifier. Although, again, it would be great to have some canonizations on the main plot. I'd be all for that. Hopefully that wouldn't come out of your budget. I'm sure the president's office would be able to chip in a little bit at that point, right? I don't want to go too much into academics and education today because you're going to talk about this a lot more. I think you have a particular topic just on education. I have what I call the 8 Beatitudes of a Holy Cross education, so we're not going to get into all 8 today. But this point that we want to be, again, doing education in the faith, but we want to be doing it by fully educating the students we serve, the parishioners we serve, in the skills, traits, skills and talents and instruction that they need for their careers, their callings, but at the same time we're helping them grow in virtue and in faith. And we never, and it's interesting, and my classmate really points this out, I know we've done it on the shorthand, your office has probably done it too, ours did as well too, where we say we educate both mind and heart. The actual wording from our founder was different, right? It says the mind will never be cultivated at the expense of the heart. So he puts a real priority in that sense then on the heart. We're always watching for the heart. So we have to be careful that while we're growing, and this is Notre Dame's, I'll speak frankly about Notre Dame, this is one thing Notre Dame has to continue to watch. While we continue to grow in academic excellence, that we're not shirking that cultivation of virtue and cultivation of faith. That's where we always are checking ourselves to make sure that in advancing educationally, providing the best education to our students, we're not shirking their moral formation and their faith formation as well. We're not going to educate the mind at the expense of the heart. At the same time, we're going to educate the mind and educate as fully as we can. Back when it was not popular, Blessed Basil Moreau was advocating science education in seminaries. It was unheard of at the time. But again, he believed that priests had to be trained in other disciplines to be able to make a difference in the world. And so this is why Holy Cross institutions, not just the University of Notre Dame, are known for their academic excellence across the globe. One of the best high schools in Santiago, Chile, one of the most influential is St. George's College, a Holy Cross high school. In a Muslim, predominantly Muslim country of Bangladesh, one of the most elite schools, one of the ones that most of the Muslim leaders send their children to, is a Catholic school, Notre Dame College in Dhaka, run by the University of Notre Dame. In East Africa, one of the best high schools, even though it's in a slum area in a terrible district and neighborhood, pulling from very poor kids from rural areas, one of the best overperforming high schools there is Lakeview Elementary, founded and run by the Congregation of Holy Cross. So across cultures and across countries, academic excellence, but then also in all those schools there's a real emphasis, I believe, on faith formation and especially formation for service. One of the amazing things, if you look at the 4 colleges and universities we have in the United States, is that all of them are ranked very highly in terms of graduates who go on to do service and undergraduates who participate in service and those who go on to live lives of service afterwards. It's a real part of that faith formation component, the formation of the heart. Again, I could go in ad nauseum into education, but you're going to do that later, so this is just a brief overview, and I see my time is starting to wrap up here, so I got to move. We do that, and this is what I was mentioning earlier about the 3 areas I serve. There's 3 areas that we work in primarily as educators in the faith. One of those would be education, which you would know well here. So we're here primarily, the priests serve at universities and colleges. There's 4 that the U.S. province, which is what what the University of Notre Dame belongs to, that we sponsor. King's College in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, Stonehill College in Northeastern Massachusetts, and the University of Portland in Portland. So we work in educational institutions. The brothers work more usually at the high school level, but they also have a university, St. Edward's University, founded of course by Edward Soren in Texas. We also then say we work in parishes and mission. So Holy Cross has a strong emphasis on parishes as well. You know, this is one thing that would separate us a little bit from the Jesuits, for example, that have a strong emphasis as well in education. They don't work as much in parishes. Holy Cross, we have a very strong emphasis to working in parishes and also missions, foreign missions. Those go back to our founding. I think you're going to have a history lesson on one of these talks as well too, so I won't get into it very deeply, but from the very beginning, that's what Holy Cross did. We started with the Brothers of St. Joseph, which were founded by Father Dujari. They were working in parish schools, so education. Father Moreau found the auxiliary priests, which were to help as priests going around preaching parish missions. We had the parish component from the beginning. And then when he brought them together as Holy Cross, the first thing he did, he sent them out around the world in mission to other places. So from the very beginning, those have been the 3 main emphases of our mission. Of course, there's other things that religious can do and do. Healthcare, spiritual direction, chaplaincy. Holy Cross dabbles in those things, but we dabble in those things. Our 3 main core areas are education, parish, and mission. It's part of what we do. So again, the U.S. province, to which the University of Notre Dame belongs, has 4 colleges and universities it sponsors, 13 parishes spread out through the United States, and 4 mission territories that it has responsibility for: Mexico, Chile, Peru, and East Africa. So if you ever meet Father David Tyson, just give him a hug and tell him you'll pray for him, because he has a lot of work that he's overseeing. Far bigger than many dioceses and far more complex. And then the last thing I want to put on what we do, I mentioned this earlier, but again, I think this is important for you all, especially if you're reflecting on how you live out the Holy Cross charism, is one other thing that we do is community or family. As I mentioned, we believe that, and our founder told us, that our family, our community, was an essential part of our mission. It wasn't something ancillary to it. It wasn't something that we just added on for the sake of, well, if we're going to do this, it'd be better if we do it together. We'll have some support. No, we believed community and family was part of what we did on behalf of others, because we know we grow up in a world, especially now, and live in a world that's fragmented, that's broken. A lot of our students come from broken, separated, or divorced families. We live in a society that is ever more polarized, ever more fractured. And so showing people the real possibility of being bound together in love, to be bound together as brothers and sisters, united despite our differences in a common mission, common cause, and common goal, that's one of the greatest gifts that we can give to other people as Holy Cross and as you with us in mission. And that's why also too, Holy Cross has always seen, and the University of Notre Dame has always seen, that the residence halls are an essential part of the education of our students. I mean, it's part and parcel to what they learn here, because part of what we're doing for them is helping them learn how to build community, learn how to navigate relationships, to get over the frustrating roommate or annoying next door neighbor, to learn to reconcile, to forgive, to build and to grow together, because that's, above all, what our world needs, men and women of solidarity. And so part of what we do is that we work at that community ourselves, and again, we try to extend it to others. It's an essential part of the mission, and you all here are at the heart of that mission, certainly in the Division of Student Affairs. I'm sure we'll talk about that much more later, but that's important to say. Got to wrap up here. We're romping to questions, so I'm going to go really quickly. I always have more than I get through. It's standard for me. How we do it. So I'm going to go through this a little bit more quickly, and then we'll open to questions. So there are, and again, this is more important for me when I work in vocations work, there are other communities that might fit a lot of those similar things, but what starts to make it unique and how we carry it out as Holy Cross. So how do we do it? How do we carry out our mission? Just a few quick things here I want to mention that are good for us to keep in mind. The first, I would say, is that we do it as neighbor to those whom we serve. This is not a hard one for you to understand, because of course this is the other big reason why priests, brothers, sisters, and now lay men and women live in residence halls. We want to be neighbor with those whom we serve. We want to cast our lots with them. There's this beautiful line from our constitutions, again, our guiding document, tells us how to be who we are. It says, quote, "As disciples of Jesus, we stand side by side with all people." Now think about this. This is written by priests and brothers. "Like them, we are burdened by the same struggles and beset by the same weaknesses. Like them, we are made new by the same Lord's love. Like them, we hope for a world where justice and love prevail." So there's a real sense in Holy Cross that we're together with the people that we serve. It's not that we stand above them, we stand with them. And again, you see that so powerfully here in the dorms. That's also true of our rectories. Our rectories at our parishes, it's a growing trend, unfortunately, in the church, that sometimes priests will live in rectories that are actually in condominiums away from their parish in a better and nicer part of town because they're preparing for their retirement. It's not the safest neighborhood where the church is. That's a growing trend, unfortunately, in the church. Holy Cross rectories are right in the bad neighborhoods where they live. You can ask Father Mike Matthews about all the gunshots he hears at Holy Cross Parish. So we...
in a rough neighborhood.
What?
Moreau's in a rough neighborhood.
Moreau Seminary. Yeah, I mean, it's a rough neighborhood over there on the north side of those lakes. But even for example, our seminaries and our overseas missions, the seminary, our houses of formation where our guys live, in some cases are an hour and a half from the seminary, because the seminary is in a very rich neighborhood. And we said, well, we'd rather have our guys live and work with the people who they're going to serve. Sentence them to an hour and a half long bus ride there and back every morning with evening, which we started to wonder at times, is that really the best thing for their education? Can we split the difference and put them in a middle class neighborhood? But again, it speaks to Holy Cross's desire to have us living with the people whom we serve. We want to be neighbors to the people who we serve. The second thing, and this is one of my favorites, I think also extremely Holy Cross. If you want to understand this one's huge. is that we do it as individuals in community. So far as religious, we have slight little jokes about each other. So my joke about the Jesuits, who again, remember, I have all the professed my love for. My joke about the Jesuits is if you meet one Jesuit, you've met none of them. Because the Jesuits are so individualistic, in a good way. They're significantly bigger than Holy Cross, so the Lord has clearly believed that their charism and the work that they do is important for the life of the church in the world, because there's thousands of them, right? But they're more individualistic in the way they carry out their work. It's part of their dynamism on behalf of the church. It means if you met one, as I kind of joke, you've met none. There's a lot of differences between them. On the other hand, you can have the Benedictines, and I say about the Benedictines, if you've met one, you met them all. Because the community for a Benedictines is so strong, and part of their charism they give to the church is to show forth that strong unity, and in some sense the individual dissolves a little bit into the community. That's not a bad thing, it's just what they're called to do in mission as well, and again, there are plenty more Benedictines than there are Holy Cross priests and brothers. I like to say about Holy Cross, if you've met one of us, you'll recognize the rest of us. If you've met one of us, you'll recognize the rest of us. Because it's a balance between the individual and the community. Certainly you've met enough Holy Cross priests on campus to know that their personalities, their styles, their spiritualities have differences. But I hope you've also experienced, as I did as a student, and as I have since I joined the community, that they hold something in common as well too. That they're not so much individuals so much to the point that there's no longer a community, there's no longer something they share in common. Holy Cross, as Father Scully said to my parents, Father Tim Scully, who was still Executive Vice President at the time, he met my parents at graduation and said to them, "Oh, don't worry, you're not going to lose your son. You'll still recognize him when we're done with him." Because he went on to explain to them, he said, we want to make sure that Drew develops his gifts and talents to the fullest, because how is he going to best serve the church? This is under Holy Cross's understanding. I'll best serve the church by developing my own individual gifts and talents within the context of Holy Cross. So a typical funny one I give of this is, one of our priests says, I want us to be underwater basket weaving. Well, if none of our schools teach underwater basket weaving, the response is going to be no. That doesn't kind of plug into our mission. They'd be, well, what's your second choice? Well, I want to study underwater pottery making. Oh, well, we do teach that at University of Portland. Why don't you go study that? So we want this person to develop their individual gifts and talents, but again, in the context of our mission. So we do it as individuals in community. Our own individual gifts and talents matter. We develop them, but always in the context of community. And again, I think you've probably witnessed that in Holy Cross. If you ever get a chance to go visit our Holy Cross religious in East Africa, take the opportunity. They're different than our American version because they enculturate. They're Africans. They live an African life. But after you spend even probably a half hour with them, you're going to be like, you must be Holy Cross, because you're going to recognize the connections to the priests and brothers who serve here. In fact, I thankfully have a couple of our brothers from East Africa, priests who are serving here right now. Father David Eleone is getting a master's degree, and Father Leonard Lobo, who leads the mission center. You get a chance to meet them. They're African, they clearly are, but they're also, they're going to strike you as like a reek of Holy Cross. But it's a good reek, right? It's a good reek. The third thing, going quickly, is that we do it as God's work. This was really big to our founder, was that Holy Cross was the work of God, not our work. Again, I think that gets back a little bit to what we were saying earlier when we were talking about how sometimes as Holy Cross we struggle to articulate our part and our role in our institutions, because we really don't believe it's our work, it's God's work. We do this fundamentally as God's work. We believe it's His mission that we're participating in. We're only stewards of that. We're not the leaders of it. It's God who takes the lead. Except Holy Cross religious are very zealous. We carry out what we do zealously. One Holy Cross religious once put it to me, Holy Cross religious pray as if everything depended on God. And would that we always be true, but it's more often than not true. So Holy Cross religious pray as if everything depended on God, but they work as if nothing depended on God. Holy Cross religious pray as if everything depended on God, but they work as if nothing depended on God. Again, this gets back to 2 jobs is too few. Very zealous. And you all put these in as hours as well too, but think of all the hours that Holy Cross priests and brothers put on this campus, long beyond a 40-hour work week. I mean, when I meet diocesan religious priests who tell me about their pain of a 50-hour work week, I'm like, step it up. Add another 30 hours and then talk to me. But you participate in that as well, do we? Carry out zealously. That's a word that goes back to our founder. And that's why I also like to joke that the Holy Cross is a community of overachievers. And our institutions have overachieved in part because of the extra effort and love and devotion that Holy Cross priests and brothers have put in along with their lay colleagues, the extra effort that you put in zealously serving as well too. That's why our schools and universities overachieve. I mean, there's no reason why Notre Dame should become what it became. You all know the story here very well. There's no reason Notre Dame should be what it is today, except for God and except for men and women, religious and lay, who are willing to zealously work to serve God over those years. Another big thing for Holy Cross, going back to our founder, is that we do what we do in union with the church. You might get this more when you get the history lesson, but when Father Moreau was founding the community, there were a lot of tensions in the church at the time, and Moreau was known as an ultramontanist. It meant that Moreau was someone who was always seeing himself as being a son of the universal church, which of course for us is symbolized by the Holy Father in Rome and his ministry over the universal church. And so for Moreau, it was always important that Holy Cross did what it did in union with the universal church, as part of the church. We don't do what we do, as I like to sometimes say, there's nothing Catholic if it's not concrete. Because for Catholics, for us, everything is always enfleshed, incarnated. To be Catholic is to be part of the church. And for Holy Cross to serve the church, it means that we're in union with the church in the work that we do. Wrapping up, so I'll have time for a little question. Sorry, it was a little longer than I thought it was going to go. Two last points. 6, I'm going to abbreviate. I'm going to put divine providence and cross as hope. So Moreau, spiritually wise, told us the two greatest things besides the Holy Family he gave us were this trust in divine providence and a confidence in the cross, our only hope. These are things that are foundational to us. It goes back to our motto, Ave Crux Spes Unica, hail the cross, our only hope. And so he told us in particular to find hope when there's cross, when there's suffering, when there's pain, when there's setback. He was also a very big believer in divine providence, which is shorthand to say that God's hand, God's providential hand, is at work in all things. I'm a big believer that those two can only go together. The only way we can ever maintain, as I like to tell our seminarians, that nothing's wasted in God. Absolutely nothing is wasted in God. Even your negative experiences, hurtful experiences, sinful experiences, missteps, bad decisions, those are never wasted in God. God can use all those things for his glory. I mean, we see that most of all, of course, in the cross. The cross was the lowest point of human history. We killed God's son, yet it came the moment of our salvation. God didn't waste our greatest act of sinfulness. He turned it into our salvation. God wastes nothing in our lives. But to sustain that belief, to believe that God can be at work in all things, to believe that the burning down of a main building, which is the majority of one's campus, is somehow God's providential hand reminding us that we built too small, means that we have to have a faith that even the cross can be our only hope, that even setback, pain, and suffering can be for God's greater glory. And Holy Cross priests, I think, really live that out. It's something that I know, especially those who share in the work at the counseling center, I think the counseling center in particular, those who work with our students at the residence halls, part of what we're doing with them is letting them know that their crosses, even though we don't explicitly use that language, that their suffering, their setbacks, their missteps, their disappointments, that's not going to hold them back from becoming eventually who they're supposed to be. That's the work of proclaiming the resurrection. That's the work of proclaiming the hope of the cross. And that's, to be able to do that though, what does that require? That requires us, again, these go together, to be neighbor to those to whom we serve. It means that we have to have our lives committed, attached to the people who we serve, because otherwise we're not going to be that connected to them to get into the nitty-gritty of their lives, to get into the messiness, the hurt, and the pain. But that's a huge part of our spirituality, and it's a huge part of how we do what we do. How do we carry out that education? By reminding our students that even their setbacks, their crosses, their disappointments are for God's greater glory. I mean, and for their greater growth. I mean, one example of this, it always boggles my mind. In 1854, 18 Holy Cross religious died at the University of Notre Dame. To put that in perspective today, if that number were to die, that would be a quarter, and it was more back then, that would be a quarter of the priests on campus dying in the course of a year. And Moreau and Soren didn't say, time to leave, let's get out of there. I mean, in Bangladesh, we had religious dying year after year, and Father Moreau just kept sending more. Oh, some could say he was misguided, but he believed that out of those deaths, out of that sacrifice would become something great. And now in Bangladesh, 5 of the 6 bishops are Holy Cross. The local church there is thriving because Holy Cross was the only religious community willing to go there and work. We ended up going to Bangladesh, this is a little side story, because the Vatican blackmailed us. Holy Cross wanted to get its constitutions approved no other religious community in the church would go. So the Vatican came to Holy Cross and said, we'll approve your constitutions if you go to Bangladesh. So we went to Bangladesh because we were being blackmailed essentially by the Vatican to get our community approved to take an assignment that no one else wanted. But Moreau was willing to take that assignment because he believed that in the cross there was hope, there was divine providence. That again, setbacks, crosses, even 18 deaths in the community in the course of the year weren't necessarily signs that things were going wrong. It could be very signs that we're doing exactly what God wants us to do. And the last thing, which I wanted to wax poetically and compliment you more than I'll be able to by running out of time, is with lay collaborators. And this is, of course, the punchline, and this is why what you're doing is so important. From the very beginning, ahead of his time, well ahead of Vatican II, Blessed Basil Moreau, the founder of Holy Cross again, believed in bringing lay collaborators into the mission of Holy Cross and uniting them to our work in a myriad of ways. I don't have time to historically get into all that, but that's been true since their very foundation. And certainly if you look at our institutions today, our parishes, our schools, we cannot do what we do without you. We can't be who we are without you. In some sense, Holy Cross is the very, I would say, vulnerable position then. Our future as Holy Cross religious depends on all of you. Our future work depends on all of you. For us continuing to be a gift to the church and the world, we depend on you, because without you, we can't be who we are, we can't do what we do, and we can't do it how we do it. You're absolutely essential for us filling out our vocations and being faithful to what we feel the Lord has called us to. Without you, we can't do it. And so we probably don't thank you enough, although I'm sure Father Tom hopefully does it pretty regularly. He's good at that. But on behalf of all the community and the congregation of Holy Cross, priests, brothers, and sisters, I want to thank you for not only listening to me this morning, but also for your work with us. Because again, without you, we can't be who we are, we can't do what we do, and we can't do it in the way we do it. You're absolutely essential to that. And I hope that you see yourselves in that way, and I hope as you continue to serve and work here and through these continuing education meetings you have on Wednesday mornings that hopefully don't take up all but like 5 minutes of question time, that you'll be able to see yourselves ever more as part of the Holy Cross charism, part of the root and the lifeblood of this university and this wider mission in Holy Cross. And so if you ever want to learn more, you're happy to talk with me, and I will have time for a couple of questions. But again, most of all, I do want to thank you again. We can't be who we are, we can't do what we do, and we can't do it how we've done it and how we want to do it without you. It's always been true, and it'll continue to be true. Ever more so as our mission gets more complex, as the society that we seek to help change becomes more complex, you're going to become ever more important, like you've always been. So thank you for that. Thank you for what you do. Questions?